everyone, and welcome back. So, today we are going to discuss one of the most intellectually rich and historically significant topic in the Indian constitutional law, the constitutional debates of the Indian Constitution. Now, when we study the Constitution, we often focus on the articles. But what truly brings depth to the constitutional understanding is knowing why those articles were introduced and what were the debates that surrounded them and what the framers intended. Now, the Indian Constitution is not just a legal document, it is the result of intense deliberations, ideological conflicts, compromises, visionary thinkings. These debates they took place in the Constituent Assembly of India between the year 1946 and 1949. So today, when we will decode the same, we will be decoding the sources of Indian Constitution, the philosophy of the framers, the key debates on important articles, and the purpose behind those provisions. So let's begin with the sources of the Indian Constitution. Now, the Indian Constitution is often described as a bag of borrowings, but that phrase is misleading if it is taken very superficially. The framers did not blindly copy, they have carefully adapted global best practices which are suitable to Indian conditions. Now, some of these major sources they include from the United Kingdom, we have adopted the parliamentary system, we have taken rule of law, legislative procedures. From the United States, we have taken the fundamental rights, judicial review, independence of judiciary. From Ireland, we have taken the directive principle of state policy. From Canada, we have the federal system with a strong center. From Australia, we have the concurrent list. And from the Government of India Act 1935, we have the administrative structure, federal scheme, and the office of the governor. Now, the key point here is the constitution. It reflects a synthesis of global constitutional wisdom, which is adapted to the Indian realities. Now, let's understand the framers of the constitution. At the center of this process was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, as everybody knows, was the chairman of the drafting committee. But the constitution was not the work of one individual. Other key contributors included Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Rajendra Prasad, Aladi A.K. Iyer. Now, their philosophy was guided by three core principles, that is justice, liberty, and equality. And these are the values which were ultimately reflected in our preamble. Now, the framers had to balance individual rights versus the state of powers. They had to balance federalism along with unity. They had to balance tradition along with modernity. So let's go ahead and discuss the preamble, which reflects the spirit of the Constitution. The famous objective resolution was introduced by Jawaharlal Nehru in 1946. Now, this resolution is something that later became the foundation of the preamble. Key debates revolved around whether to include the word God, whether India it should be described as federal or union, whether socialism should be explicitly mentioned. Ultimately, the preamble declared India as a sovereign democratic republic. Later, through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976, the words socialist and secular were added. Now, the whole purpose of having the preamble was it served as a guiding philosophy and it helps in interpreting the Constitution. One of the most intensive debates, I would say, was on the topic of fundamental rights. Now, these are enshrined in the third part of the Constitution, as everybody knows. It was inspired by the US Constitution, and the fundamental rights were something that was introduced to protect individuals from arbitrary state action and to ensure civil liberties. The key debate for the same included justiciability of rights, whether the citizens should be able to directly approach the courts. The framers said yes, leading to Article 32, which is called as the heart and soul of the Constitution by Dr. Ambedkar. The purpose of this particular article was to provide constitutional remedies, reasonable restrictions. Now, there was also a concern that absolute rights could lead to absolute chaos. So, rights like freedom of speech under Article 19 was subject to reasonable restrictions. The whole purpose was balance between liberty and public order. Preventive detention. Now, this was one of the most controversial debates. Despite opposition, provisions were included under Article 22. The purpose was national security and public safety, especially in newly independent nation. Now, let's move to the directive principle of state policy under Part 4. These were inspired by the Irish Constitution, and unlike the fundamental rights, they are non-justiciable. This led to a major debate. That is, why to include provisions that are not enforceable in court? The answer lies in their purpose. The aim of directive principles is to establish a welfare state to promote social and economic justice. Their examples are included in this articles or laws for equal pay for equal work, promotion of education, public health. The purpose of directive principle is to guide the state in policy making. Let's talk about federalism versus strong center. Now, another critical debate was on the nature of the Indian Federation. Should India be a loose federal state like the USA or a strong centralized system? Given the context of partition, communal tension, and integration of princely states, the framers chose a strong center. That is why we call India as the Union of States. The whole purpose is to maintain unity and integrity. The idea is to prevent fragmentation. Let's talk about the most common debate on language. The language debate was one of the most emotionally charged discussion. The key issue was, should Hindi be the national language? There was a strong opposition from non-Hindi speaking regions. Finally, a compromise was reached. Hindi in Devanagari script was adopted as one of the official language, and English was allowed to continue for official purposes. The whole purpose was to maintain national unity, simultaneously avoiding any linguistic conflict. Independence of the judiciary. Now, the framers strongly believed in the independence of judiciary. This was very essential to protect the fundamental rights, to ensure the rule of law. The provisions also included security of tenure for judges, judicial review, and separation of powers. The purpose of this was to act as the guardian, that the judiciary needs to act as a guardian for the Indian Constitution. To conclude, the Indian Constitution is not just a legal text. It is a product of deep intellectual debates, compromises, and foresight. Every single article has a history. Every provision has a purpose. Understanding these debates help us to interpret the Constitution better, appreciate its vision, apply its meaning, apply it very meaningfully in practice. And as law students and professionals, this depth of understanding is what sets you apart. If you found this session valuable, do share it with your friends and fellow learners. Let me know in the comments which constitutional debate do you find the most interesting. I will see you in the next session. Thank you so much.